Hi, my name is Marigold. And the moment I found out my parents used my house to host a party for my sister's engagement, without even asking, I didn't scream. I didn't text. I didn't confront. I just changed the locks. That single act, quiet, calculated, final, was the first time in my entire life that I took something back from them. My space, my silence, my spine. Let me tell you what led to that. We weren't a family built on love. We were built on optics. Growing up, my parents didn't hide who their favorite was. Avalon was the daughter they wanted. She had the golden hair, the big doe eyes, the high-pitched laugh my mother once described as like wind chimes on a spring morning. She could spill juice on the couch and be called spirited. I got a B+ in chemistry once and was grounded for slipping into mediocrity. I learned early that silence got me further than protests, that if I played small, invisible, maybe they'd just forget to be disappointed in me. Our house, back then, was a battleground. Not one with shouting or breaking dishes, but the more dangerous kind. Polite cruelty, backhanded praise. Family dinners where no one said anything directly, but the tension was butter knife thick. Avalon would share stories about her school friends and recitals. My parents would listen like she was reading scripture. I'd try to add something, anything, a science fair project, a debate win, and the room would shift. Their faces would glaze over. My mother would check her watch. My father would clear his throat, and the subject would change. By the time I graduated high school, I had already begun saving for my escape. College was my sanctuary, not because it was fun, but because it was mine. I worked through undergrad, got my own place, and cut the cord in every way I could. Except one. I made the mistake of letting them back in when I bought the house. It was an old property I'd fallen in love with. Wooden beams, creaky floorboards, and a sunroom that felt like a secret. The kind of place you could build a future in. The kind of place that made you feel safe. I worked 2 jobs and gave up vacations to afford it. I painted every wall. I retiled the bathroom by hand. Every doorknob was replaced with ones I'd picked myself from a salvage yard. I remember the first time they visited. My mom walked through the front door, looked around and said, "It smells old. Are you sure this is wise, honey?" Avalon just rolled her eyes and joked, "Well, it's cute, for now. Don't let it fall apart before you get a ring, Mar." There was no congratulations, no warmth, just a subtle reminder that in their eyes, I was still the supporting actress in Avalon's perfect life. So you can imagine my disbelief when I opened Instagram one Tuesday afternoon, just casually scrolling between meetings, and saw a post on Avalon's story. A flyer, an invitation. Engagement celebration, hosted by Mr. and Mrs. Jameson at Marigold's Place. Join us for champagne and dancing under the stars. Marigold's Place, like it was a restaurant, like I was the help. I blinked, closed the app, reopened it. It was still there. I wasn't asked. I wasn't told. I wasn't even included in the group chat. At first, I thought maybe, it was a misunderstanding. But the next day, I saw it again. Now with RSVP links and a guest list of nearly 70 people. The location tag? My exact address. I called my mom. She didn't pick up, texted. Nothing. Finally, Avalon answered. "Oh my God, you saw the invite. Isn't it cute?" "You used my house, Avalon, without telling me." "It's one night, Mar. Come on. We wanted somewhere with character, and your place fit the vibe. Don't make this a thing." "It is a thing. It's my house." She sighed like I was overreacting. "Look, Mom said it was fine. And you're barely ever there. You work all the time." And there it was. That subtle jab. The old narrative. I was too focused on work to have a real life. My house was just a placeholder until I figured out how to be normal like her. I hung up without saying another word. But I didn't cry. Not this time. I went home. I sat in my living room, looked at the walls I had painted, the shelves I had built, the pillows I had sewn, and for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt used. I called the locksmith that night. The following morning, I drafted a formal email. Effective immediately, no one is permitted access to my home without prior consent. This includes family. Any events planned without my express approval are hereby canceled. I sent it to every email I had for them. Mom, Dad, Avalon, even my uncle, who always blindly took their side. No one replied, but I saw Avalon view it within 2 minutes of sending. The week that followed was quiet. Too quiet. Until Friday, when the cake delivery truck showed up at my driveway, and I stood at the window, sipping my coffee, watching the driver get frustrated that the gate wouldn't open. They thought I was bluffing. They were wrong. More to come. Some things get louder when you stop speaking. The lock clicked into place with a satisfying metallic snap. A sound so small, yet it felt like thunder inside my chest. That door had never been mine. Not really. Not when I bought the house. Not when I signed the deed. And definitely not when I painted over the beige walls that my mother once said looked respectable. It had taken years for me to build something on my own. But I realized, standing there, keys in my hand and silence thick in the air, that the hardest thing wasn't building a life without them. It was convincing myself I deserved to. That house was supposed to be freedom, but lately it felt like a second trap. And now they were trying to reclaim it, like they always did, with charm, manipulation, and the assumption that I would bend. 2 days passed after the email. No calls, no messages, not even a passive-aggressive meme from Avalon. Then came Saturday. I was in the backyard garden, pruning the climbing roses I planted the first spring after moving in. They'd just started to climb the trellis again, stronger, more stubborn than before. I'd smiled at that, until I heard the crunch of gravel from the driveway. I turned. They were all there. Avalon, wearing white. White. Like the moment wasn't already a monument to her narcissism. My parents flanked her, arms crossed, faces unreadable. Behind them, 2 delivery trucks idled, engines rumbling like warning growls. "What the hell is this, Marigold?" Avalon's voice pierced the air like a high C gone sharp. "I locked the house," I said, steady, quiet. "You don't get to do that," she snapped. "Yes," I said, taking a step forward. "I do." My father walked toward me. Slow, calculated. That same pace he used when I was a kid and forgot to say, "Sir." "Sweetheart," he began, voice dipped in honey. "I understand your feelings, but this party isn't just about Avalon. It's for the family. Your family. Can't you just let this go?" He always did that. Made me question if my anger was too big, too loud, as if the act of setting a boundary was a sign of mental instability. My mother joined in, her expression condescendingly gentle. "You've always been a little sensitive, Marigold. No one's trying to hurt you. It's just a party, one night." "That's the problem," I said, eyes locked on hers. "It's always just one night, one favor, one exception, until you've moved in and I'm stuck picking up your mess." Avalon let out a laugh, dry and venomous. "You're really going to ruin my engagement for this? For a house?" "I'm ruining nothing," I said. "You invited 70 people into my home without asking. You planned my space down to the wine list. You even called it Marigold's Place like I'm running a venue." "It was a cute name," she muttered. "It was my name," I said. My mother looked genuinely puzzled. "Why are you so angry? You live alone. You barely use the place." That was it. The moment. The snap. It was never about the house. It was about how easily they erased me from it. I didn't let them in. I stood at the door, behind the new security gate, and watched them pace. I recorded the whole thing, from their entitled rage to the moment Avalon threw her bouquet on the ground like a bratty toddler. They left angry, but they didn't leave defeated. I knew my family. This was just the opening act. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I regretted anything, but because for the first time, I let myself feel it all. The years of being overlooked, the milestones I celebrated alone, the job promotions no one asked about, the hospital visit I Ubered home from because no one came. There's a special kind of grief in realizing you were never the main character in your own family's story. I poured a glass of wine, sat in the middle of the living room floor, and opened an old box from the closet. Photos, report cards, a dance recital ticket stub from when I was 6, the only one I performed in. No one showed up. My mom said she was tired that day. I never danced again. I found a letter Avalon wrote when she was 13. It was addressed to the Tooth Fairy, but at the bottom, she'd drawn a picture of our family, with herself, mom, dad, and no me. Even then, she'd written me out. By morning, I'd made a decision. No more soft boundaries. No more guilt. I drove downtown and met with a lawyer. Not for a restraining order, yet, but for paperwork. Ownership clarification. A cease and desist drafted, just in case. I even filed to officially name the house under a new title, Marigold House. That name wasn't a brand. It was a reclamation. And then, on the way home, I stopped at a small, unassuming boutique, the kind of place Avalon would call boho witchy. Inside, I found a little wooden sign. Hand-painted. Not everything that looks like family is love. I bought it and hung it over the front door. Sometimes, the past doesn't haunt you. It shows up at your front door in designer heels and a twisted sense of entitlement. It wasn't just the locks that changed. It was me. The locks were the symbol, sure, but what shifted beneath the surface, what no one could see, not even me, not yet, was that something inside had finally stood up. Not with a shout, not even with a tear, but with a quiet, permanent kind of resolve, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be final. I spent the next week alone, purposefully. It wasn't about hiding, it was about observing. And what I saw, from behind my closed door, through the lenses of the new security system I'd installed, was a parade of people trying to push back into a space they thought they were entitled to. It started small. On Wednesday, a florist arrived with 5 oversized centerpieces, hydrangeas, peonies, lilacs, all in that soft pastel palette Avalon thought made her look ethereal. The delivery guy rang the bell 3 times, then knocked like a cop. I watched from the kitchen monitor. He called someone. "Yeah, no one's answering. The gate's locked. I don't think she's home." "What do you mean go around? It's a steel gate. I'm not hopping a fence for peonies." Click. He drove off. Thursday was worse. A caterer arrived with trays, followed by a DJ van, then 3 early guests. I watched them all cluster on the sidewalk like tourists locked out of an Airbnb. By Saturday, the day of the party, the chaos peaked. Cars lined the block. People in cocktail attire stood in clumps, sweating under rented umbrellas. My front yard, once a quiet haven of rosemary and hydrangeas, now looked like a flash mob in disarray. And in the middle of it all, my parents stood with Avalon, trying to save face. I watched them from the upstairs guest bedroom, curtains drawn. I had thought the sight would bring me some kind of vindication, but it didn't. Not immediately. What it brought first was grief. Not because I doubted myself, but because I finally saw them for who they were. People who would rather humiliate themselves in public than admit they didn't ask permission. People who would risk it all to avoid ever saying, "We were wrong." It was never about the party. Not really. It was about control. And losing it. Avalon, predictably, was the first to crack. She was pacing on the front lawn, phone glued to her ear, gesturing wildly. Her fiancé, Noah, stood stiffly beside her, watching the scene unfold with barely concealed embarrassment. My mother followed her around like a campaign manager in crisis mode, whispering, soothing, brushing hair off her shoulders. My father stood in the shade, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Then it happened. Avalon turned toward Noah. "This is not my fault," she shouted, loud enough for the entire street to hear. "She's insane. I told them this would happen. She's always been jealous." That word, jealous, burned. It wasn't just wrong, it was cruel. Jealous of what? Being invisible? Being disposable? I didn't go downstairs. I didn't burst out the door with righteous fury. but I did hit record. By evening, most of the guests had left. A few lingered, confused. Whispers, eye rolls. One woman in heels took a selfie in front of the gate like it was a trendy speakeasy. Another couple gossiped by the curb. Honestly, I think the sister had a breakdown. My friend says she lives alone, barely talks to anyone. I mean, if she didn't want to host, she should have said something. Right? Families are weird. The irony. They had no idea how loud I'd been screaming, just not in ways people cared to hear. That night, the video footage was saved to 2 drives, one kept in my fireproof lockbox, the other uploaded to a private cloud. Just in case. I wasn't planning revenge, not exactly, but I was done pretending I wasn't under siege. Later that night, I got the first message. From Noah. Hey, I'm sorry about today. I didn't know they hadn't cleared it with you. I thought you were traveling? Anyway, I get it now. Hope you're okay. It was short, too short, but something in it was different. He sounded embarrassed. Not angry, not entitled, embarrassed. The first ripple. The next morning, I drove to a cafe outside town. No Wi-Fi, no familiar faces. Just dark roast coffee and a corner booth with a window. I opened my laptop and wrote them an email. Not a reply, a declaration. Subject: clarity. Dear Avalon, Mom, and Dad. This house is not a venue. This house is not a vibe for your lifestyle branding. This house is not a stage for your perfection theater. It is my home. It is the only place I have ever built for myself, with no help from you. And while I've tolerated a lifetime of silent disrespect, I won't anymore. You did not ask. You did not consider. You assumed I would be too weak, too afraid, too eager to be included to say no. You were wrong. If you need a backdrop for your next performance, I suggest renting one like everyone else. Respectfully, Marigold. I read it once, then again, then hit send. No fear, no hesitation, just air, clean and full in my lungs. Some boundaries don't just keep people out, they finally let you in. For 48 hours after I sent the email, silence reigned. I thought that meant they got the message. I was wrong. By Monday afternoon, I received an envelope. Not a text, not an email. A real envelope. Cream-colored, heavy, addressed in my mother's perfect cursive. Inside, a letter. 8 pages, written by hand. It didn't smell like perfume, the way her cards used to when I was a kid. No, this one smelled like ink and dust, and the kind of nostalgia that wasn't earned, just sprayed on to cover the rot. I stared at it for a full hour before opening it. And when I did, I wished I hadn't. Dear Marigold, it breaks my heart to write this under such circumstances. I never imagined we'd come to this. But after your recent actions, I feel I must speak plainly. You've always been different. And I don't mean that as a criticism, though I know you'll take it that way. You were always intense, easily hurt, withdrawn. We walked on eggshells around you for years. You never made things easy. You never bent, even when it would have made everyone's lives smoother. Avalon has her flaws, but she has always been generous, warm, inclusive. People love her. She doesn't try to make things harder than they are. We've tried to love you. We do love you. But we cannot keep tiptoeing around your moods. If you felt excluded, you could have said something earlier. You didn't have to humiliate the family. That party was for joy. It was for us. You made it about you. We raised you to be strong, not spiteful. This will be our final attempt to resolve this before taking further steps. We hope you will come to your senses. Mom. No apology, no acknowledgement, no ownership. Just more of what I'd always gotten. Blame dressed up as concern. Judgment disguised as disappointment. I laughed. A bitter, disbelieving laugh. They hadn't just missed the point. They'd turned it into a weapon. But it wasn't the letter that got to me. It was the line. This will be our final attempt to resolve this before taking further steps. That wasn't concern. That was a threat. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. I didn't tear it up. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because evidence matters. Something told me I'd need it. That night, I called my Aunt Frances. She hadn't spoken to my parents in years, not since the inheritance argument after Grandma died. Mom said Frances had gone off the deep end and had become toxic, but Frances had always sent me cards. Quiet, thoughtful notes. Not often, but consistent. She picked up on the third ring. Marigold? There was surprise in her voice, but no coldness. I didn't know where to start, so I didn't. I just said, "Do you remember when Mom got pregnant with me?" Silence. Then a long sigh. I was wondering if that would ever come up. We spoke for 2 hours. By the end of it, I was trembling. Frances told me things my parents had buried, or maybe rewritten. That when Mom got pregnant with me, she was terrified. Not of childbirth, but of how it would make her look. She'd just started volunteering with that elite church group, Frances said. She thought a second child so soon would make her look unstable, irresponsible. Your dad wanted to keep you, she didn't. My stomach turned. They almost gave you up, she said. What? They talked to a private agency, nothing official, but she told me outright she considered placing you for adoption. Said she didn't think she could bond with another child. I couldn't breathe. Frances continued gently. But when you were born, your dad held you first. I think that's what made them change their minds. Still, you were always an inconvenience to her. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark. It made sense, in a sick way. The distance, the coolness, the way my mother always looked at me like I was a math problem that refused to solve. I was never a daughter. I was a decision she regretted making. And somehow, it only made me more certain. They didn't get to rewrite this story. The next morning, I printed out the letter my mother wrote, annotated it with a red pen like I was grading a paper. I circled the passive-aggressive phrases, underlined the gaslighting, added notes like, "No ownership here." This is emotional manipulation. Classic deflection, making me the aggressor for setting a boundary. Then I folded the pages and mailed them back to her. With one sticky note on top, corrected for clarity, "You're welcome. Truth doesn't set you free. It makes you dangerous to people who built power on your silence." It was a Thursday when I noticed the email. Subject line: Follow-up, property dispute discussion. The sender? A law office in town, one I didn't recognize. I clicked it open. Ms. Jameson, our firm has been retained by your parents, Richard and Cynthia Jameson, to inquire regarding the use and occupancy agreement for the property currently titled in your name. My vision tunneled. They were trying to take my house. I scrolled further, breath quickening. Based on long-standing familial use, emotional investment, and verbal understandings of shared access, we are requesting a formal discussion before pursuing further legal action. There it was. They weren't just angry. They were escalating. This wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't even about Avalon's failed party anymore. This was about punishment. Retaliation. I shut the laptop. My hands were shaking, but not with fear. With rage. I stood in my kitchen, the morning light casting long lines across the tile. The same tile I had laid with my own hands. The grout still uneven in the corner by the fridge. A reminder of how human, how determined, how mine this house was. And they wanted to erase that. Just like they'd erased everything else. My phone buzzed. A text. From Noah. Can we talk? In person. I won't bring Avalon. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then I remembered. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was war. And you don't win wars by walking away from intelligence. We met at a neutral place, a park, midday, bright and open, no shadows to hide in. He looked tired. Not just tired, strained. Like someone who had finally seen behind the curtain and didn't like the show. I didn't hug him. I didn't even offer a handshake. He sat beside me on the bench, hands in his lap. I didn't know they were doing this, he said quietly. They're not doing this to you, I said. They're doing it for Avalon and themselves. I think I get that now. I waited. Noah exhaled slowly, like the truth was dragging him down. I wanted to marry Avalon because I thought she was centered, driven. But this past month has been revealing, I offered. He nodded. She talks about you like you're unstable, he said, turning toward me. But you're the only one in this family that makes any sense. The words shouldn't have meant much, but they did. Because for the first time, someone who used to sit at their table saw them without the filter. And saw me. We talked for almost an hour. About their entitlement, their rewriting of history, about how they made chaos look like culture. I'm not sure I can go through with it, he said quietly, staring at the pond. The wedding, the whole thing feels plastic now. I didn't reply, because it wasn't my job to save him, but I could see he was sinking fast. And maybe that was enough. That night, I started collecting receipts, emails, screenshots, messages from old relatives, financial records of every renovation I'd paid for out of pocket. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing to make one unwinnable. For them. I forwarded it all to my attorney, along with the letter from Mom, annotated, and the video of Avalon screaming in my front yard. The reply came within hours. You're solid. If they pursue this, we'll countersue for harassment and damages. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing at first. Then it hit me. They had no power left I didn't allow. 3 days later, they tried one last thing. A letter. Not from a lawyer this time. From Avalon. Scrawled handwriting. A different tone. I didn't know Mom and Dad were going that far. I swear. I just wanted to fix things. I still want us to be sisters. I know I've messed up. Please don't let them make it worse. A note of panic. A tremble. But here's the thing about manipulators. When they lose their grip, they don't reach for forgiveness. They reach for pity. And that pity is poison disguised as peace. I didn't reply. I changed my number that week, shut down all my social media, canceled every subscription I shared with them, cleaned the house top to bottom, like I was exercising something. And in a way, I was. Not evil, but permission. Permission to let them treat me like I was disposable, replaceable. That version of me no longer lived here. Sometimes the loudest revenge is absolute silence and a locked door that never opens again. There was no dramatic exit, no bags thrown in a car, no slammed doors, just silence. I packed a weekend bag, 3 days' worth of clothes, my sketchbook, a couple of paperbacks with cracked spines, and drove. I didn't leave a note. They didn't deserve a finale. The Airbnb I booked was 2 hours away, in a lakeside town so small it didn't have a grocery store. Just a market that sold homemade jams and cucumbers the size of my arm. The house was modest. Blue siding, a porch swing, the kind of place that made you forget to check your phone. The owner, Claire, was in her 60s and wore linen like armor. When she handed me the key, she said, "No loud music, no parties, and no overthinking." She smiled as if she knew. That first night, I sat on the porch and listened to nothing. No texts, no ping of a notification, no noise pretending to be connection. I watched the stars bleed into the lake, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone a version of myself. The next morning, I drove to a nearby art supply store. Not because I planned to paint. I just needed to touch something that wasn't tactical, that wasn't defensive. The woman at the register asked, "Acrylic or oil?" I said, "Neither. I don't even know if I'm good." She shrugged. "Who cares? Just don't be boring." I set up a makeshift studio in the sunroom of the Airbnb. Blank canvas. Primary colors. Brushes too cheap for a gallery, but perfect for beginners. And I painted. Badly, messily, joyfully. I painted a burning house in soft pastels. A woman underwater, breathing fine. A locked door with flowers blooming on the outside. I painted until my hands cramped, until the brushes were stiff with dried color, until I wasn't thinking of my parents, or the lawsuit, or Avalon's note, just color, just release. Claire checked on me occasionally. Sometimes she brought fresh muffins, other times she left me alone. One afternoon, she brought over iced tea and sat beside me on the swing. "You're grieving," she said without preamble. "I'm not crying. Grief isn't always wet," she said. "Sometimes it's just quiet." We didn't talk after that. We didn't need to. On the fifth night, I got a message from Noah. They called off the wedding. I stared at the text, feeling absolutely nothing. No triumph, no shock, no, "I told you so," just peace. He followed up an hour later. She told me the truth. About the party, about the pressure, about the agency your mom contacted when you were born. She found the file. My chest tightened. She said she never wanted to believe you, but now she can't believe anything else. I put my phone down, sat in silence, stared at the night, where the lake had turned into ink and the stars were too tired to shine. Then I picked up my brush and painted a girl sitting inside a lighthouse, alone, but surrounded by light. On my seventh day in exile, I decided not to go back. Not permanently, at least. I extended the Airbnb for 2 weeks, applied for a part-time residency at a local art center. They said my work was unpolished, but emotionally potent. I took that as the highest compliment. I sent one message to my lawyer. "Tell them I'm not returning calls. All communication must go through you. My terms remain unchanged." That was it. I didn't need to burn the bridge. I just needed to walk away while it collapsed behind me. That same night, I bought a new domain. marigoldmakes.art, not a business, not a brand, just a space. Mine. Not every escape looks like running. Sometimes it looks like staying still for the first time. It was a Sunday morning when I saw her. I was leaving the art center, arms full of half-dried canvases, smelling like turpentine and new purpose, when a voice behind me said, "Marigold." I froze. Not because it was Avalon, but because she was alone. No camera-ready outfit, no curated glow. Just sweatpants, a stained hoodie, and eyes that had seen too much, too fast. She looked like grief had put her on mute. "I called 3 times," she said. "I changed my number. I emailed. I don't read them. I didn't know where else to go. That's not my problem anymore." I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was true. She didn't flinch. That surprised me. She just stepped back, hands raised slightly. "I'm not here to take anything, I swear. I need to say something, and then I'll leave." I didn't invite her in, but I didn't walk away. We sat outside on a public bench, 2 sisters who had once shared a childhood, but never really a bond. The space between us felt like a chasm built from unsaid things. She looked at her hands, then out at the parking lot, like she couldn't quite look me in the eye. "They broke me," she said softly. "I didn't ask who, I already knew." "I thought I was special," she continued. "I really believed that they loved me more because I earned it. I was good at being what they wanted, charming, presentable, perfect." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. But after the party, after Noah left, after the story got out, I saw how fast they turned on me. Like I was the problem, like I failed them. I waited, because I could hear the turn coming, and there it was. They blamed it on you, said you poisoned him, that you manipulated everything. Mom said you were always jealous and unstable and dangerous when ignored. Her voice cracked. Not with tears, but with something more corrosive. Shame. And I believed her, even then, even when I saw how calm you were about it all. I looked at her for the first time. She looked small. Not physically, but existentially. Like her identity had deflated. "I found the file," she said. "That file. The adoption file Francis told me about. I read it 5 times. I still can't believe it's real." "It is," I said. "She wanted to erase you before you could speak." "She nearly did," I replied. And for a moment, everything went still. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out an envelope. "It's not a letter," she said. "It's a contract. I had them sign it. Dad and Mom. They gave up all future claim to anything in your name. House, accounts, even family photos. I told them if they ever tried again, I'd go public. My stomach twisted. Not from disbelief, but from the deep, unfamiliar sensation of someone finally standing with me, not above me. I know I can't fix everything, she said, and maybe you don't even want me to. But I couldn't live in the lie anymore. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was necessary. A clearing. A pause between storms. Finally, I said, "Why now?" "Because for the first time," she said, "I want to be something other than their favorite." We didn't hug. There was no dramatic reconciliation. But when she walked away, I didn't feel the usual hollowness. I felt the shape of something new. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe a ceasefire. That night I drove home. Not to the house I'd escaped to, but to my house. The one they'd tried to claim. I walked through every room, touched every doorknob, let the memories brush against me, not to wound me, but to prove I was still standing. In the living room, I placed Avalon's envelope in a drawer. Not as forgiveness, but as record. I started planning my next project that night. Not a painting, a podcast. Family Fiction was the working title. Each episode would tell one story, not from vengeance, but from clarity. The kind of clarity you can only earn by surviving the rewrite. Sometimes the most powerful closure isn't revenge, it's letting the story breathe in your own voice. The day I recorded the first episode of my podcast, I didn't wear makeup. I didn't rehearse my lines. I didn't even write a script. I sat in the center of my living room, legs crossed on the floor, the mic clipped to the collar of my worn gray tee. The same one I wore when I painted that burning house. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting warm shadows across the rug. And I just spoke. I used to think silence was weakness, that if you didn't speak, didn't fight, didn't scream, you weren't resisting, you were surrendering. But silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is how you reload. Sometimes silence is how you protect what's still healing. And sometimes silence is how you learn to hear yourself again. I paused, not for effect, but because I felt the weight of it settle around me like smoke. Gentle, but unrelenting. I thought about the woman I used to be, constantly scanning the emotional landscape for danger, measuring her worth by her ability to absorb disappointment without complaint. And I thought about the woman I'd become, still scarred, still cautious, but sovereign. I wasn't a house they could enter anymore. I was the key they never held. The podcast took off faster than I expected. It wasn't just views, it was the messages. Hundreds, then thousands. Stories from people who had lived in shadows of golden siblings, who'd been gaslit into silence, who'd been told to shrink for family harmony, who finally heard someone name what they hadn't dared to. I didn't answer every message. I couldn't. But I read them all, and I carried them. 3 months after launching, I was invited to speak on a panel for a women's mental health event in Chicago. I stood backstage in a navy blazer that still had the tag tucked inside, because buying it felt like a declaration of territory I wasn't sure I belonged in. And then the host called my name. I stepped into the spotlight, and the first thing I said was, "There are so many ways to be orphaned. Not all of them involve death." The room went still, and then it breathed with me. That summer, I launched a community fund for estranged adults looking to rebuild their lives. We called it The Quiet Room, a space, digital and physical, where no one had to explain why they walked away, where healing wasn't earned, it was given. Claire, the woman from the Airbnb, became our first community mentor. Her sessions were always booked. She didn't ask questions. She just gave space. A year later, we bought a cabin near that lake, not for guests, for us. We called it Haven. One day, a letter arrived. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single key, no note, no explanation, just a key. For a moment, I stared at it, felt the cold press of its metal between my fingers. Then I walked outside, opened the rusted lockbox on my porch, where I kept returned mail and charity drop-ins, and placed the key inside. I closed the lid and walked away. Some doors don't need to be slammed. They just need to stay shut. Sometimes I still pass by the house. My house. It's still mine, technically, but I haven't lived there since the retreat. I lease it now to a woman named Alicia and her teenage son. I met her through one of our workshops. She'd fled a controlling household. She needed a reset, a safe place to land. I told her the house had thick walls and creaky floors, and ghosts, but none that bite. And she laughed like I'd handed her hope. One night, I visited after they'd moved in. Just to check on the garden. It was thriving, wild, unmanaged but alive. Like it finally understood it didn't need to be curated to be worthy. Just like me. I left a note in the mailbox. The rosemary blooms in June. It likes to be left alone, mostly. But if you trim it back too far, it gets stubborn. Be kind to the silence in this house. It took years to earn it. M. I never got a reply. Didn't need one. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones that don't echo. Just resonate. If this story made you feel seen, just type 1. That's all it takes to remind someone they're not alone. If I've learned anything through this story, it's that healing doesn't always look like forgiveness, and freedom doesn't always come with a final fight. Sometimes, the real power lies in walking away with your dignity intact and refusing to let pain define your path. You don't owe anyone access to the version of you they tried to break. But now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose peace over people you once called family? What did that moment look like for you? If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Tell me what part resonated most, or just let me know where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, that's okay too. Tell me why. I want this space to be real. And hey, if this video found its way into your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We're just getting started.